Hello, today I'm going to be working with some of these alcohol inks and specifically using the white quite a bit because I'm going to try some epoxy pours using these to make some Christmas decorations. I've got this FlowArt Resin, which is a new product from the Epoxy Store, which they sent out for just shipping for some evaluation. So I'm going to try that today and compare it a little bit to some other epoxies that I've used in the past. I picked up these two silicone molds from the local craft store, and I'm going to start with those today. Now, I'm mostly going to be trying this FlowArt resin for the first time, but I'd like to first compare it to a few resins I've used in the past. And these are actually West System resins and Total Boda resins, and those are more intended for structural use and that type of craft, but I've used them before, and they tend to have a little bit more of a darker color when you apply them, as you can see here with starting to mix up some of the West System one. I'm just doing that one first because I've used that before. Now you'll notice I was using a cup there, and it has a flat bottom, so I actually tend to cut the tips off of the craft sticks that I use to mix it so that it gets down into the corners and mixes just a little bit better. And to save you the pain of sitting here for 2 minutes while I mix this whole thing, I'll just do that quickly. One thing in particular I like about this West System resin is that it has fairly low viscosity when you're using it. So as I was mixing it there, it was just flowing pretty well. Now that makes a little bit of a difference when I'm putting it into the mold here. I feel like it traps a little bit less bubbles that way, but overall today I'm not too concerned about the bubbles in these small pieces. It flows nicely into the mold. But you can see that there's that slight amber color, and these aren't perfectly clear. And then in this application again, I'm not that worried about it, but we'll see how that compares later to the other resin, which is advertised as being particularly clear. I'm going to scrape the last few bits out here into these Christmas tree molds, and then move on to the other epoxy. Poured the two parts of the FlowArt epoxy off camera, and I'm a little concerned that the resin part is fairly thick, like I've seen on some epoxies before. But as I'm mixing, I noticed it did get quite a bit thinner and didn't hold as many bubbles as I thought based on the thickness. And as we pour this out, you'll note how much clearer it is than the amber color of the West System epoxy. That West System epoxy was with their fast hardener. I'll try again a little bit later with their special clear and maybe compare those separately later. So this flowed in pretty well. You can see here that I poured it with a nice smooth stream, and it filled out the points of the stars quite well. Just have to clean up a little bit around there so that not everything's sticking together. Now, I went to try and get some of the bubbles off, and I was actually surprised at how quickly the bubbles came off of the FlowArt resin. It took a bit more effort to get some of them out on the West Systems. Perhaps I should have used a larger torch instead of this small lighter, but I didn't have it readily available at the time. These bubbles are coming out just with a little bit more effort, and I'm trying to make sure I stay away from heating up the silicone too much because that could damage the mold and prevent this from working at all. So we're going to start with that white alcohol ink. Just drop it in a few places, and I'm going to try here to make some similar designs in the two different epoxies to see if they respond a bit differently. I'm going to grab some yellow and try and add that in. Since these are stars, might as well make them yellow. And again, roughly trying to make the same design in both of these. Perhaps I should have started with the yellow first, but we'll see how it turns out. I'll come back and put a little bit more white on top. You probably don't want to sit here for 10 minutes watching me drip ink all over the place, so I'll speed it up a little bit and try a few different designs within these stars. The gold has a little bit of a hard time moving through the epoxy compared to some of the other colors, but if nothing else, I like the look that it gives when you first put it down. So here's a close-up of some gold in one of these stars, and we can see how that works out. I'll give you a little bit of time to watch that sparkling gold alcohol ink. After putting a little bit of yellow on the top for the star of this tree, I thought I'd put in some darker colors. Wasn't sure how this will work out, but I think there's some interesting colors that'll come out of it. Again, the gold. If nothing else, I like looking at it while it's drying. See how it turns out. After about 12 hours, I went back to try and get these out of the mold. You'll notice I added some ribbon to try and make some hangers out of this. But unfortunately, some of these weren't actually coming out. So the West Systems ones there were coming out, but all of the FlowArt ones were still pliable. And in fact, even 2 days later, they hadn't yet hardened up. It seems this epoxy is a little bit more sensitive to the ratio of hardener and resin compared to those I've used before. So we'll just have to try this again. For the second try, I think I'm going to try and measure a little bit more carefully. This time I will put a mark on my stir stick and measure it separately into 2 cups, making sure that it comes just up to that mark on the stick. It might be better to try something with some actual measurements, but I don't really have anything disposable that will do that for small quantities right now. Of course, the hardener was still fairly thick and took a little bit of work to get into the cup and level out so that I knew I was getting the right amount. I'll speed this up a little bit so that you don't have to sit here all day. After I've measured out correctly in the second cup, I'm going to combine them together and stir in there. And just for the good measure, I'm giving this a full 4 minutes of stirring, hopefully trying to avoid bubbles, but we'll see. Okay, that's already getting boring. Let's just skip ahead. Well, that worked considerably better. These hardened up nicely after 12 hours. On the previous one, I tried to use some ribbon as hangers for these and found that it pulled some of the epoxy out and up onto it and discolored them. So in this case, I actually tried little loops of wire, which worked a little bit better, but you can see there it still pulled a little bit of the epoxy up out of the mold and around there. But overall, I think this is going to work a little better. So after redoing with the FlowArt, I think I'm a little bit happier with it. It is nice and clear. Haven't had a chance to test whether or not it's really UV stable, but overall I think I'll work with it a little bit more and try some more things. In fact, I've actually been doing a few other things with this to try and test some of the other properties and compare it to some other epoxies, and I'll probably put up a video about that soon. For now, thanks for watching, and enjoy some of these close-ups of the different pieces.